Let's go to the class material first. And you're seeing it? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, main thing that I wanted you to catch from here in this particular slide is there's a relationship that has been found. Here's the actual research article. I did reference this in my doctoral education. This particular research group, they found that the position of the pelvis at foot contact dramatically affected the elbow torque. Okay. And then
Mhm.
we talk about elbow torque, we're talking about the varus torque. So that tells us how much load is on the elbow by measuring this counter force. So when the load is high, this torque is high. But what we're seeing is that this torque goes down, okay, as the pelvis is open at foot contact. So guys that don't have, sometimes it's a shortened stride length, they can't get their hips around. Sometimes it's a mobility issue or a strength issue. But players that are unable, my sweet spot's around like 33 to 35 degrees. Like when we can kind of be somewhere in the middle here, when they have a hard time with that and they're really stiff, they got, they got a lot coming from their elbow, and it's because it's just not transitioning. Um, I'm gonna go to the animation so you can see that. Here we go. And in the animation, we can, it's nice to be able to have that because we can really go on top of this athlete, and be able to take a look at this, okay, before getting to the graphs. All right. Because I'm going to use your
Mhm.
graphs, but there's graphs all over the place in this technology. So let's window in the pelvis. And you're going to notice certain athletes have some degree of counter rotation. So as they go down, there is an element of counter rotation.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, here we go, is that this pelvis is really wrapping itself this way.
Hmm.
They're trying to really get a lot of hip loading on that socket, on that joint. But when I can come out of here a little bit, my worry with athletes that do this too much is that they have to go so far the other way, and sometimes it can create more closing of the pelvis, and it can also create some accuracy issues. They become more rotational. Okay,
Right.
so this is something to look at. Now, your guys, like when you look on even slow motion video, you're gonna see kind of how restricted they are. Like how much can their hips actually rotate in, where this pelvis is going towards that femur. Guys that really don't have a lot of range, that's something to work on. I think in the weight room, some of the guys that like in the socket, they're going to have some like roughening in here. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever heard of like FAI. So it's like impingement,
Mhm.
femoral acetabular impingement. There's a couple things that happen. Sometimes it's the pelvis bone that hooks down and they get some contact that bugs them. But each guy you'll notice has a certain amount of internal rotation, and it's something I think to program. I'm gonna go over to YouTube. I'll show you a couple exercise concepts. Um, Let me just pull them up while we're looking here, because now you'll have a little bit of understanding of at least the training platform
Right.
of what I do. So I'll just put in RDL. This is really important when I look at the RDL movement. Uh, Here's one. Here's a contralateral row. I'm just going to pull it up for us. So it's these activities that are single leg. When I bring them over here, desktop two, the big thing with this, when the player leaves the floor, one of the things I want you to look at is the foot. A lot of times it will tell you a lot by being behind the athlete. Okay. Uh,
Hmm.
if I can annotate this a little bit, a lot of people are looking at the athlete when they're coaching them from my perspective. Okay. Because they're so into this angle. Like how
Mm-hmm.
flat is their back, right? I'm doing a row activity, while I'm doing this. But when you look at the foot, for me, one of the things you want to see is, can it internally rotate in? A guy that picks his foot up right away and he's going pinky toe, upward to the sky, he's got some tight hips. And one of the things that I tell them is that before they take the foot into the air, before they come back upward into their RDL, this pattern, I tell them, hey, put the big toe of that foot right on the inside part of the shoe before you go back. So they're grazing the shoe.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, you're going to start seeing these guys get, it'll creep a little more of this rotation. And when we do that, when we create internal rotation, we're getting internal rotation at the hip up here, right? But what
Right.
happens is, even on the opposite side, we're getting some internal rotation here because they're not rolling, they're holding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
these particular exercises, they're I got a lot of them. Single leg. I like single leg because 2 feet on the ground, you're not getting a lot of rotational control. Where when you watch it, um, I got some diagrams here, but can you see my toe touch? Do you see down?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So let me play it again, because I want because this is something that I think you need to cue when you're training your athletes. Is like, hey, let's get the toes to touch here, and like just try to go bring your foot straight back. Like, I'm a tight dude, so your guys are they're gonna be much better. But that's one of the exercise concepts, in my opinion, that you can take a look and start matching the biomechanical piece to the training, because
Mm-hmm.
now you might have a guy that's really restricted, like he can't counter rotate his pelvis. His pelvis might be stuck here, and then a lot of what has to happen, there's not a rotational element of control. Like he's got to push a lot. Okay. So you can see these things, and on your data, you have an opportunity to check that out as well. So looking at how they counter rotate. Another thing about the pelvis that you can look at is, let's see what they have in creating single leg stabilization, elevating the hip. Let me show you what that looks like, um, with the pencil. So here's the hip line. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by elevating the hip is that as they're transitioning this way, that hip is starting to elevate. They're able to hold, some kind of pelvic tilt is,
Mm-hmm.
is what we call it. Okay.
Yeah.
And the way to really, in my opinion, get some pretty decent pelvic tilt in the exercise world is to do, single leg stance stuff. And I'm going to give you another example of that here. So let's go to um, a 45 kick. This is very easy looking, but it's pretty tough. Okay. Because I notice a lot of baseball players, pitchers in general, they're a little bit weak, when their legs in the air. And that really doesn't help them set up the pelvis. So I'll bring this video up and show you this particular exercise. You'll watch how I do it, and then I'm gonna give you some pointers on it.
Okay.
Okay. So all I'm doing here is I'm holding a bar, something for stability. But the biggest key that I notice when people do this, my athletes, when they do this, I want them to create a straight line. Some of them start leaning, okay? And when you
Right.
lean, you're not really using this part of your hip to hold up this part to make that hold up here while you're square. So I'm going to delete all these guys so you can kind of now see what I'm talking about. So I really, I use it as a prep. The guys can't do a lot. We're talking about sets of 5 or 6. It's hard, but I'm angling and I'm kicking. Now the other thing too, so I come up for some knee, yeah, and it happened a little quick. Let me see if I can slow this down a little bit. Um, and go here. Okay, so I coming up to knee height. Okay,
Right.
my next move is internal rotation. You see this?
Yeah.
Okay, this position, and we talked about internal rotation on the front side. But internal rotation on the backside allows the athlete to store a lot of energy in that drive hip. Your biggest energy storage, and this was shown in research from a guy who does a really good job of researching energy flow. Um, it's really in this drive hip. In that drive hip socket, if this hip drops, okay, now all of a sudden I've released all this store energy because I can only really push. I can't gradually use gravity and hold it coming down. Okay, so I train this a lot with my guys, and in our programs we have these. I Because I just find baseball players are really weak, with pitchers for sure. They don't have the motor control to hold this for too long. But
Mm-hmm.
when they can store the energy, and try to be as linear as possible with their upper body and stack, that's great. Now, the guys that have internal rotation, again, you're looking at the toe. I really don't want that toe to swing out. I want to see if I can keep their toe, like I say, toe to your nose. See if we can keep the toe, to your nose in this exercise, right?
Right.
This is an easy one that your kids can do, and they're gonna be like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard for them even to hold their leg. The extension of it when they get really solid at it, right? There's this one that becomes much more challenging. Now I'm opposite loaded. I got a 10-pound cuff weight on my ankle. I have a 5-pound on my wrist. But our guys, they can go fast, but do they have the motor control to go slow?
Mm-hmm.
And once they start developing that crossbody, hey, strength loading from here to here, um, it starts to present some interesting things. I mean, I'm going at different tempos, but now we're storing more energy, and that's important too because your counter rotators are now going to have a better control of the pelvis, and when that's the energy sink, it starts feeding everything in the delivery. I'm going to come out of this, and we'll look again at the animation on desktop 3. Okay, let's look here because we talk about the loading of the pelvis. Okay, so now when that guy is landing, and we'll look for when he's like more weight bearing foot flat. The little small arrow, remember what that is? That's a little ground reaction force loading. He's loading there, just touching the ground, really,
I
just for
can't
maybe
see
a
it
little
right
bit.
now. I see
Oh,
you.
oh, oh, sorry, yeah.
There we
Okay.
go.
Yeah, here we
Yeah.
go. So now I got a lot of screens going. So you you can see the arrow. Let me move it down. Oh boy. Okay. Can you see
Yeah.
that little arrow at the foot?
Yeah.
So he's starting to heel load. Okay. And then what's happening is that when it's weight bearing foot flat like that, that's when he's really braced. And then this is the angle I'm talking about here. Where is that pelvis angle? Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
that's telling us how much it's getting around. So if we have the drawing tool, the reference point for the pelvis generally, okay, it's either two things. Some people, like in my studies, I called that 0 degrees. Anything back here negative was counter rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Anything over top of that was positive. That was rotation, acceleration, rotation. But okay, if we had this one here, your your particular data references this from what I'm seeing is 90 degrees. So what they do is they change where this reference point is. They actually say like this is 0 degrees, the line
Right.
that's even with the plate.
Right.
And so anything that kind of goes beyond 90, and it's all positive numbers, they're saying that, you're counter rotating. So it's, 180, I think is what they had as being completely flush, or sorry, no, this is zero. This is zero what I have here. I think with your data, we're gonna take a look at it and really dive in. But when we're talking about the pelvis position, 30 degrees, this is where I like the zero as a reference because that's like more traditional biomechanics. When you read it, like this line will be zero. And then when they're telling you where it's rotating from, it's just basically telling you how far back the pelvis is. So, when you look at your data, let's just say this one is 30 degrees. Okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's got 30 degrees from that zero line, until he's flush. And that again, like I said, science has shown that it's unloaded the elbow. And when you look at this, like when you're looking at this, you got to be thinking too, when you got guys that, they don't have a really good amount of pelvis opening, you really want to be able to say, okay, I got to beef up their arm strength. And this guy goes into a different monitoring bucket because he does not get the biggest energy generator around. So that's something I look for. I don't necessarily change mechanics, but remember, we're looking at strength and coordination. So if I know these associations, I can start bucketing players and saying I got to really focus in on this guy because he's got these particular tendencies. And then
Mm-hmm.
what happens from this point, and a lot of people don't train that either, is that your groin, okay, and your hamstrings, they then start bringing the pelvis into the leg. They start creating internal rotation into the leg, um, upon this weight bearing foot flat because now they're starting to roll in. Okay, so you see how the pelvis, here's weight bearing foot flat.
Mm-hmm.
Now from here, I got that little bit of negative angle, and now that pelvis is starting to roll into the leg. It's really starting to internally rotate on this leg.
Right.
So yeah, it gets confusing with some people, when they think about it. Internal rotation, there's two things. If my leg's in the air, okay, internal rotation means that upper thigh bone rolls in like this. But if my leg's on the ground, it's the opposite effect. It's making an internal rotation angle because the pelvis is rotating against a fixed leg.
Mm-hmm.
That's called closed chain pelvis rotation. That's what we call it. Open chain is when I'm just looking at my leg in the air, like we showed you, knee up, rotate in. That's open chain. And then, the biggest thing that I see here per se, and one thing that we're going to go to the data in just a moment to check is where is the pelvis at ball release? Because that's a big piece of everything. So here I'm going to back away from this visualization, but what we can see, okay, this athlete looks pretty squared up, but when he gets to the ball release position, I'm going to take a look here. It's generally a couple ticks back of 90 degrees. Okay, so he's probably there with ball release. When we look at it, if I confirm with the data, it looks like he's not even, with that reference line. Either it be zero, either this is 0 degrees or 90, any way
Yeah.
you slice it. So this means that this guy has an over rotated pelvis. Okay. And what you see sometimes, his head's way outside his lead knee. Like there's classic signs of, being a very rotational type of pitcher. We do have to beef up, what's going on here with the elbow. We do have to beef up our internal rotators, especially from the layback position because that pelvis is moving so much. It's not holding that catapult very well in place. So those are the images, and then I'm going to pull up the data, and I got to blow it up a little bit. Okay, let's blow this up a little bit so we can see it pretty well. So let's look at this one player again because now we gotta put all the pieces together from visualization to the graph. So when I look at the graph, we are looking at the pelvis rotation, right? We're looking at this guy here, which
Mm-hmm.
is going to be blue.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about this. We know what's this line? You remember?
Foot plant.
Yes, sir. Okay. This is good. This is the first thing we have to identify. Okay. We looked at like what is the pelvis position at foot plant, right? Now they don't remember, they don't give us that zero, they're going 0 to 180. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
and this is a negatives position. So it's not zero. My research, anything going back, all these numbers would be negative. Anything going forward ahead of the zero line, squared up to the plate, everything's positive. But we got a positive approach. So we know that when he's counter rotating, it's positive. And at foot plant, we're seeing this, okay? This is his foot plant pelvic position. We are not really up here.
Yeah.
We're kind of down from where we want to be. So this guy's pelvis stays, from what we're seeing in the data, it stays more closed. So this is a player that I would be, paying attention to arm strength, especially grip strength, taking a look at the post grip, saying, hey man, is he losing a lot of grip strength, post grip, scaling workloads, putting him on training programs, like I said, to improve energy storage and opening and holding, pelvic positioning. That would be very, very helpful to this player. Now, the other thing, so these are just positions. The other thing that I mentioned, and I want to just get the eraser out so that we don't get confused, is what do we have at ball release? Okay. So a
Mm-hmm.
ball release, let's see here. I want to grab that pen. That's right here. Okay. So there's
Right.
the pelvis at ball release. Now this is looking a lot better. So we know this guy's pelvis has to move pretty quickly. We know he's closed at the beginning, but it's looking more like he's around 90 degrees. Maybe it's a little less, but it's looking pretty close, just from the graph. That's
Right.
pretty good. When he starts getting to 100, or above, this is a guy who's over rotating a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I'm looking at this, I say, oh, great. Well, he squares up his pelvis really well. Good chance that, he'll be in a decent position, to throw strikes. We're not at the trunk yet, but again, now we can cross-reference this. Where's the trunk? So he does have more rotation, for the trunk, where he's going to be delivering. So he's not completely squared up with the trunk, but the pelvis doesn't look bad. I also like to say, okay, maximal external rotation. Where is my guy? Because this part here, from these two lines, this is where most of our arm injuries occur.
Mm-hmm.
And from the course, I called that the critical instant, from max layback, basically to ball release, and then you have internal rotation, which is after. But he's getting there. He's getting closer to 90. We just want to window in. You see how we got this I'll remove some of the drawings I have here. But do you see how we still have, like, from here to here, there's like this upward progression?
Yeah.
He's still advancing motion. So the core control, it's not that good. Like I would, and I mean, they're young, but I would have loved to see something more flat. Maybe has the speed into this, but there's not as much motion from layback, to ball release. Like he can just brace, and that's trunk happening.
Yeah.
So that piece is an important factor. I'm going to take this off because we got to look at velos. So we got to look at velos. All right. So my opinion is probably pretty quick for a younger player. The slopes are more steep. So velocities, that's throwing arm. Okay, so now we have the pelvis, right? So this is kind of when our first, like, starting to talk sequence. I'll grab a pen here if we need it. All right. So foot plant, what we're looking at is where from foot plant is his peaks happening. So he's hitting peak speed a lot closer to maximal external rotation, right? You're going to see
Mm-hmm.
some guys that they can put the brakes on pretty well. I've had some that they put the brakes on right at foot plant or just slightly after. This guy's a little late, so we know there's core control training that is going to be really helpful for this guy. And what will happen is that we'll start to slide this back a bit. He's going to hit his peaks. He'll put the brakes on a little bit earlier. The one thing though we can see from his speeds, like I said, this is a really fast pelvis. Okay, pro pitchers, the guys that I think have real good core control, they're basically like 600 and below. Okay, they control their
Mm-hmm.
pelvis, 600 degrees per second, and below. Okay, when the pelvis starts climbing up in speed, it starts disjoining the velocities that can be like the trunk pushing off of it. It's just the whole thing. The door's moving too quickly together. No one's grabbing the knob, to to stop it so that it's transferring energy. But the one thing, and the kind of the final here before we get into our next class is I want you to pay attention to the timing. It's the first time we've really talked about the timing of rotation.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that's nice to see is there's a gap between these two.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's telling us too, there's a good sequence happening, in the sense that his pelvis is hitting its peak speed before the trunk. If this pelvis peak line is getting under the trunk, there's not the most efficient energy exchange. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily mean the kid's going to pitch poorly, or even if the trunk was way past, way behind, it hit its speed early and the pelvis came after. You can see that sometimes with tennis players, where their trunk is open first and the pelvis coils around it. Guys that are airborne. But the thing is that the core control element is one thing that I look here is how can they put the brakes on? Okay. And is it sequenced right? He's sequenced right,
Mm-hmm.
and the only thing is that he still continually gradually builds up pelvic speed, because he lands a little more closed. He's got to catch it up. He's got to get, everything around. Um, what I like to see with your player after, when you start training them, there's a little bit of a dip, but I'd like to see something that's a little bit more acceleratory. So it's got a more sharp velocity line. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see the stopping to be more significantly sharp on the downward slope. This is telling me my rate of my change in velocity in the negative direction, so how I'm decelerating, is improved.
Mm-hmm.
If this cat, over time, he starts to become really flatter on the backside of this mountain, you start seeing that, like, from here, he's starting to come out here. Like, it's just really slow to decelerate. That's a kid that's got a lot of core problems. And it's a signal too of fatigue to me. And again, seeing changes in shape here and timing between these peaks, you have to look at this player and say, okay, I got to monitor their arm for sure. You got a little bit better safety net when the arm is strong, and there
Mm-hmm.
might be some, some changes in the graph. I like to go to the graph first before the numbers, because with the numbers, you miss all the transition points. They're just telling you, hey, what this looks like here and what this looks like here, but we're missing the shape of the curve. Did he become more sharp, so he accelerated faster, or did he
Mm-hmm.
become flat on the back, meaning he's not slowing down very much? Or the timing of when the peak's happening, is it coming closer and closer to maximal external rotation? That's kind of crazy. We want our guys, to be able to put the brakes on more mid phase, or closer to when their foot lands, because that's going to send all that energy that's been generated into the trunk, and they'll probably throw harder and a
Yeah.
little bit more efficiently. So, I don't know if you have any quick questions for me on this one. Uh,
Um,
I can
can
go
you
to,
go back up to the angles?
okay, yes.
Yeah. So we talked about at foot plant him being
This is velocity. Sorry, I got to go up here.
yeah, we talked about him being counter rotated. Would he is a slightly across his body thrower. Would
Yeah.
that I mean that would contribute to that, right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because so yes, he because of that, I mean, he's counter rotating, but that's one of the reasons if he's crossbody is that he could be landing closed. Opening up opening up a guy, and we tried doing that with a lot of pitchers, it didn't make them healthier.
Hmm.
The biggest thing for me is we know like the archetype of this player, okay? So if he is crossbody and he has more closed positioning, the biggest thing for us is, we got to make sure the arm is really strong. Whatever internal rotation that this guy has in his hip, we have to improve it, because it is closing off his hip. Uh,
Hmm.
and that part, he's young enough that he can create the anatomical changes. What happens sometimes, players with really bad hips, they start throwing crossbody or they're being moved, way more towards their arm side. So now they're really banging their pelvis up, against, that leg. Remember, after foot contact, the pelvis comes into the leg and they're getting, a lot of pinching and hip labral problems. So the biggest thing for him, having a plan to improve his internal rotation of his hip, but also do a lot of monitoring because, we know that, if he's not open, his trunk's going to have to open to help it. Um, and the critical piece, I think, is, when you uh, do the fatigue testing, not just fresh testing, but saying, okay, well, what's happening with this guy, his fatigue levels. To me, that's more concerning is if he's dropping a lot of strength. Um, the arm's got to be really strong because the delivery is going to take probably more out of his upper body, just
Yeah.
based on what I'm seeing here.
Right. Okay. I
And like here's the counter rotation piece, right? And it's interesting, you'll see which guys are closer to zero. And again, I'm looking for space. Like his trunk, that's pretty normal. It goes behind him 25 degrees, and the
Mhm.
pelvis, these are things that you got to see what, how they separate, and we'll talk the next time we get together about separation. That's the next thing that I want to talk to you about,
Okay.
when we connect. Okay, this will be a really good one for us to hammer.